Record to the cloud. And it's starting now. Hey, this is Takara Stacia with 2020 The Magazine, and I am fortunate to be sitting here today with New York Senator Zellnor Myrie. Did I say that correct?
You
Okay.
said it right.
Thank you for being with me today, Senator Myrie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's jump right in. As I told you beforehand, we're doing a special political issue to where I just wanted to have conversations with Black politicians. And of course, when I saw you in the headlines and saw you on social media, the first thing that made me want to sit down with you is the fact that you're a young Black politician. And then, of course, you're being in the news for being a part of what was hoped to be a peaceful protest that turned otherwise. So let's start there. Let's talk about how I don't know for you, but for me, I never would have thought that in the year 2020, we as the culture, I would say, would have to literally be out here in the streets, beating the pavement and protesting to really affirm our rights in this country. So, can you talk about that day in May when you were out there peacefully protesting in the New York City streets?
Yeah, a part of what's the tragedy of racism in this country is that it is in the soil and the DNA. And so
Mhm.
it's not something that is easily extricated. You can treat the soil, you can try to kill the weeds, but if it is deep and ingrained, unless you uproot it and really confront it, we're going to keep having the same plants grow from those racist roots. And so what we saw this summer, I think, is really an example of people starting to awaken to that fact. And for many people who like to believe that we were in a post-racial society, that Obama solved racism, that we no longer had to confront these issues, seeing one person brutalized after another with the sanction of the government, I think it was one too many. And so,
Yeah.
I went out. I'm born and raised in my district where I represent. I represent many neighborhoods in central Brooklyn, and I went out as a Black man who has grown up. I've been Black longer than I've been a state senator, and but also as a state senator to be a peacemaker. I have to work with law enforcement in my capacity as an elected official. I know many of the higher ups, and I knew the temperatures were going to be high. This was about 2 days after George Floyd was murdered, or at least 2 days after it came to public light.
Yeah.
And so I went down to try and make peace. I let law enforcement know, like, I'm coming, I'll be here. And I had a bright neon shirt with my name emblazoned on the back, with my title. And even with all of that, I was still pepper sprayed and put in handcuffs because it didn't matter. It didn't matter that I was a state senator. It didn't matter that I had 3 degrees. It didn't matter that I had been there to be peaceful. In that moment, what mattered was that I was a Black man in this country. And what I tried to do after that experience, because many of us have had those types of interactions, those of us who were fortunate enough to survive them, and we all react differently. And I saw my role as an elected official to see how I could use that pain for some form of progress. And a couple of weeks after it happened, almost about 12 days, I was back up in the Capitol passing police disciplinary reform and a whole host of other laws that would help us start to get at this issue. So while it was very unfortunate, I think it brought attention because everyone said, well, we know State Senator Myrie wasn't acting crazy,
Right.
and this could happen to him. So there must be some sort of problem. Now, it shouldn't take that, but we try to use that to help us to get the win.
So tell me about the moments that led up to you being placed in handcuffs and being pepper sprayed.
So we were following orders. I was there with my colleague in the Assembly Member Diana Richardson,
Mhm.
and we were trying to. The cops were advancing on us and telling us to move back. and we were, of course, complying with that order. And I, in fact, was trying to get other folks, other protesters, to move back as well. And so I'm holding my hands out. My back is faced to the line of cops. So you got cops that are in essentially riot gear, and then in front of them are cops with bicycles, using them as barricades to push us back. So I
Oh,
got hit in my back, my shoulders, my legs, with the wheels of the bike as they're telling us to move back, pushing me back. And so I'm turning around and I'm like, I'm listening to what you guys are doing. What is happening? Like, why are you guys doing this? And as I turn around, I hear someone shout, get him. And that's when I saw the pepper spray leave the canister and it hit my eyes. And then about three or four officers surrounded me, and they said, cuff him, cuff him, cuff him, cuff him. And that's when I was put in handcuffs. So I'm crying, the picture that I tweeted, I'm crying out in pain. I've never felt pain like that in my life. I've never been pepper sprayed, handcuffed, until I became a state senator and I was protesting police brutality,
the irony in that.
and which is wild. And so, I get handcuffed and I'm crying out, I need help, I need help. My eyes hurt, my eyes hurt. And the officers are being not really responsive. And it wasn't until about 15, 20 minutes later until someone recognized who I was in the police department that the big dog came over and said, take him out of the handcuffs. And then I got medical attention.
Wow. So you only received medical attention at that point because someone recognized you.
That's right. That's right.
There was an article in the New York City and State, and one of the things that you were quoted as saying was, I have all of the things that you quote unquote want to avoid trouble and have a bunch of degrees for which I'm paying dearly, which I can relate to that.
Come on now. Yeah.
I have a pretty good pedigree by way of my profession as a state senator. I have no criminal records. I went to peacefully protest. Regardless of all of those things, I was still subject to unjust treatment by the NYPD. Has the department as a whole issued an apology to you?
So I didn't get a department-wide apology. I got apologies from individuals in the department who felt what happened was wrong. I got a call from the mayor of the city of New York, expressing his sorrow that this had taken place. But the truth is that while it's unfortunate that this happened to me, and I'm carrying that trauma going forward, my biggest worry was that if this is how they treat me, I hope the world sees that so many more people are treated like this
Mm-hmm.
that don't have my title or my platform.
Absolutely.
And this happens every single day. Even in that instance, while I was in pain and while I was in handcuffs, there came a point where I was like, okay, someone will recognize who I am, and then everyone's going to scramble to try to rectify. But there were people on the line waiting to be processed, people who were peacefully protesting like I was, who didn't have that title. So it was a weird moment of privilege for me, even within this brutality that I had as an elected official, to be able to step out and not be processed and not go to jail. And so many people do not have that, and they're not afforded that privilege. And that's the real injustice. That's what I was hoping that we could point people to.
Absolutely. So where do not only do you go from here, but where can we as young African Americans go from here? If this could happen to a senator who was being peaceful, who was complying, of course it can happen to anybody else. But how can you use your voice to then turn around and say to some of the other young African Americans that it's still okay to use your voice? It's still okay to protest, and this could very well happen. How are you going to convince them of that?
It's a tough sell. I remember being back in the district and back on the block, and some of the dudes coming up to me like, "Yo, Z, we saw that what happened to you, and that's crazy," and sort sort of lamenting that this is the treatment that they get all
Mm.
the time. And, I remember telling folks, like, yeah, it's really, really messed up. But the only way that we can begin to change that dynamic is to continue to hold people accountable. And that includes holding people like me accountable. So if you're a young person and you are rightfully enraged by the brutality that you see and the structural racism that you see, there are a couple of ways for you to combat that. One, of course, is you can continue to go out and protest, and that I think has its place. And we saw some immediate action from that. But I also think there are things on the policy front that it's important for our young folks to be engaged on. And look, you don't have to be an expert on anything. You have people that work for you. I work for the people in my district. Your representatives in the state legislature, in the city council, in the United States House of Representatives, in the United States Senate, they all work for you. You contact them and say, I want to see what you're going to do about ending structural racism in our system. What do you propose? What have you been behind? What are you fighting for? Because it's going to take many angles to get at this. Going back to the earlier portion of our conversation, because this is a structural and historical problem, there isn't one solution. And it really means that we're all going to have to use whatever talents you have to attack it. Maybe you don't want to go to a protest. Maybe you don't want to call your elected official, but you are a very good artist in whatever art that is. That can be drawing or music or spoken word. Use that platform to speak your mind and to call to action some of your peers. And so I think this is, you read about this in the history books, you read about the civil rights movement, and you're like, wow, what would I would have done had I lived during Martin Luther King's time? And we're living it right now. You are in it right now,
Or
and you have the opportunity to make a difference.
I love it. So tell me, what are some of your platforms? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are running for reelection, correct?
I am.
Okay.
So I got elected. I got elected in November of 2018
Okay.
to my first term, and so I am up for reelection this November. I was going to say, voting has already started, and so that's ongoing. But the last day to cast a vote is November 3rd, which also happens to be my birthday. It's like the
Oh,
worst
wow.
birthday. It's the worst birthday, particularly this year, to have. I think we're going to be rightly focused on some existential things here in the country.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but yes, but I am running again, and I'm running on my record. What we have fought for in the Senate, we passed historic regulations around rent and affordable housing. That was something that was an impetus for me to run. I live in a rent stabilized apartment, grew up in a rent stabilized apartment. We've been able to drive down evictions 40% because of that law that we changed. And so we're going to continue to fight on that front. I did a lot in the election space. I'm chair of the elections committee in the New York State Senate. And so early voting, which starts here in New York, at least October 24th, that was the first bill that I passed. It was the first bill that the Senate passed. And, we've done a lot of reforms on that front to make it as easy as possible. So I'm going to continue to push for that. I've done a lot around the criminal legal system. I was intimately involved in what we did for bail reform, what we did around speedy trial and discovery laws, what we did around police reform. But there's a lot more for us to do, and that I look forward to pushing. And so, I'm really excited about what we get to do the next term because we've shown, I sponsored 20 bills that have become the law.
Mm.
And I'm very grateful to have been able to do that in my first 2 years in the Senate. So I look forward to doing more of that in the next two.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Let's talk about the presidential election this year. Now, I've posed this question to all of my interviewees. What I've heard probably more than anything, especially on social media and in a lot of the local campaigns, I'm hearing constantly, it's important that you vote. You have to vote this year as if your life depended on it. And I know for so many of us, that is just words. It's just words.
Mm-hmm,
And a lot of
mm-hmm,
people don't get the true importance of this presidential election. Can you speak to that, and just what would be your pitch to young voters and new voters to get them out for this election this year?
So it's interesting because every election year you hear that refrain. People say, "This is the most consequential election.
Right.
This is the most historic." Um, this election coming up in November, um, without hyperbole, without gas in it, without any of that, this is the most consequential election of our lifetimes for a number of reasons. We've had differences in policies that make it up to our presidential platform and that is debated and that we have serious differences over. Um, what we generally don't have differences over is the legitimacy of the democratic process.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have deep differences over the rules of the game. And what we're seeing in this election is one side that believes in democracy, even if that democracy, the outcome is such that your person doesn't win, and another side who says this entire democratic process, voting, absentee voting, early voting, all of that is illegitimate and rigged. And so you cannot trust the outcome. That is not something we have seen at a presidential level in our lifetimes at all.
Right.
And someone who attacks the very foundation of the democracy is not. This is not just like any other election, and it's why it's important that people participate in numbers like we've never seen. And the early voting numbers suggest that that is beginning to happen. 10 million Americans have already voted, which is much higher than what we've seen in 2016. But that's why it's so important to engage. All the policy stuff is clear. I don't want to get too partisan here, but it's very clear if you're a young person why it's important for you to engage. The future of the planet is at stake. Your student loans are at stake. Whether or not you can afford a home is at stake. Whether or not we will have a criminal legal system that encourages the mass incarceration of people that look like me is at stake. Those things to me appear to be clear to our young folks. But the structural damage that will be inflicted if you do not engage cannot be overstated. So that's why it's important for you to get involved.
I appreciate that. I thank you so much for your time today, Senator Myrie. This has truly been an honor. I look forward to seeing I'll say your reelection, your victory speech. I look forward to
I
seeing that.
I appreciate that, and again, it's an honor to be with you and to be a part of this effort.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to